There's a reason some pages of wartime manuals were ripped out, burned, or buried in classified archives. During World War II, engineers and resistance fighters stumbled upon something so effective, so hauntingly simple, that both sides quietly agreed it should never be taught again. It wasn't chemical. It wasn't explosive. It was mechanical, silent, primitive, and terrifyingly efficient. The kind of invention that made even hardened soldiers step lighter. This is the story of the silent ambush, the trap they tried to erase from history, and why its lessons still matter for anyone serious about survival and defense today. When simplicity became a weapon. In the chaos of occupied Europe, resistance fighters were often armed with little more than their wits and the will to fight. No rifles, no grenades, no tanks, just raw ingenuity and the terrain beneath their feet. Out of desperation came a design that turned the earth itself into a weapon, the step snare. This trap didn't rely on gunpowder or gadgets. It relied on physics and human instinct. The setup was brutally clever. A shallow pit, carefully disguised with twigs, leaves, and a thin lattice of bamboo or saplings. Beneath it waited a sharpened stake angled upward, often hardened in flame. The covering could support the weight of debris, but not that of a boot. When a soldier stepped onto what looked like solid ground, the surface collapsed just enough for the leg to drop, driving the stake upward. It didn't kill instantly, and that's what made it devastating. A wounded man screamed. His comrades rushed to help. Movement stalled. Morale cracked. Fear spread faster than bullets. What started as one trap became a psychological wildfire that burned through entire platoons. Why it terrified commanders more than enemies. By the end of the war, Allied and Axis officers had a shared problem. Soldiers hesitating to move. Every step became a question mark. Each patch of ground a possible death sentence. That hesitation was deadly. Armies survive on rhythm and trust. Trust in gear, in leaders, and most importantly, in the ground beneath them. The step snare broke that trust. It weaponized instinct. And once troops started doubting the earth itself, discipline wavered. Panic crept in. That's when high command realized they had created something uncontrollable. Not just physically dangerous, but psychologically corrosive. By 1947, the weapon had been erased from nearly every engineering handbook. Manuals that once detailed field expedient traps suddenly jumped pages, redacted, or marked restricted. The step snare became the trap that officially never existed. The science of fear and terrain control. Every effective field trap relies on two universal truths. People trust the ground they walk on, and they follow paths of least resistance. The brilliance of the step snare was that it looked exactly like the safest place to step. Soldiers were trained to spot wires, mines, and disturbed soil, not to question the ordinary. That's why this piece of forgotten fieldcraft still holds weight for modern-day survivalists. Because the core lesson wasn't about injury, it was about influence. It taught that terrain can be shaped to control human behavior. Even in ethical, peaceful contexts today, the same principle can protect homes, camps, or remote shelters. A survivalist can design landscapes to deter intruders, not harm them, using the psychology of movement. How resistance tactics became survival science. Those wartime engineers didn't have wire or nails. They had roots, mud, and ingenuity. They studied how sunlight hit the soil, how moss grew, and how natural erosion disguised their work. Every trap was a lesson in observation, and that's the transferable skill most people overlook. Today, that same knowledge applies directly to ethical survival. Want to hide an emergency cache or protect a shelter? Think like those resistance fighters. Blend with the environment. Match colors, textures, and materials. Avoid anything shiny or out of place. The art of camouflage is not about invisibility. It's about harmony with nature. Even modern rescue teams use this logic in reverse. When building safe routes in disaster zones, they study how the ground reacts under pressure, how debris moves, how to guide people instinctively toward stability. The line between a deadly trap and a life-saving path lies in intent. The knowledge they tried to erase lives on. When World War II ended, the step snare and similar field traps vanished from official instruction. But they didn't disappear completely. Veterans who had seen their power firsthand passed on fragments of that knowledge, not the trap itself, but the thinking behind it. That mindset, turning limitation into advantage, became the backbone of Cold War survivalism. Manuals from the 1950s used phrases like terrain denial and environmental defense. Sound familiar? Those ideas trace straight back to the resistance engineers who learned how to make the landscape itself an ally. Today, understanding that mindset separates serious survivalists from hobbyists. It's not about setting traps or going rogue. It's about mastering control of the environment, seeing the invisible layers of terrain, instinct, and reaction that govern every step. How to apply the lessons safely today. For those studying historical fieldcraft or modern self-reliance, the practical takeaway is, well, simple but powerful. The terrain can protect you if you learn to read it and shape it. Start by observing how sound travels where you live. Walk your property at night and, note which areas crunch, echo, or stay silent. Use that to your advantage. Build natural noise barriers where you want awareness. Funnel movement toward lighted or visible zones. Replace harm with strategy. Replace traps with terrain control. What resistance fighters once used for survival in war can now teach survival in peace. It's about readiness, not retaliation. Awareness, not aggression. The forgotten edge of history, the silent ambush, the step snare, whatever name you give it, wasn't just a trap. It was a revelation in human psychology and fieldcraft. It proved that the most dangerous weapons are often the ones that make people doubt their own instincts. And that's why it was banned, erased, and buried. But history has a way of whispering back. The lesson still stands. Control the ground and you control the fight, or the flight. So for every historian, prepper, or survival enthusiast tuning in, remember, the power of terrain is timeless. Study it, respect it, use it ethically. If you found this deep dive into forgotten wartime tactics as fascinating as we did, don't forget to subscribe to HistoryHQ. Share this story with a fellow history buff, because there are still secrets buried in the dirt, and we're here to dig them up, one by one.